You see, there comes a moment in every dynamic, especially the one between an empath and an avoidant, where silence becomes louder than words. For a long time, the empath carries the weight of the connection. They explain, they understand, they forgive, they show up again and again. Even when met with distance, their heart becomes a landing place for confusion and mixed signals. But one day, quietly, almost gently, they stop. Not out of hate, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. That's when everything changes. The avoidant, who once felt safe knowing the empath would always be there, suddenly realizes the absence isn't temporary. It's final. The messages stop, the energy shifts, and the emotional lifeline they took for granted is cut. What once was a game of control now becomes a mirror of loss. The avoidant feels the silence not as peace, but as consequence. When the super empath detaches, it's not a performance, it's evolution. They no longer chase clarity, they create it. They stop explaining their worth and start embodying it. What the avoidant once perceived as emotional weakness now becomes unshakable strength. And that strength is unsettling. Because for the first time, the avoidant can't predict, manipulate, or dismiss their impact. The empath's withdrawal exposes the emotional bankruptcy of avoidance. And here's the truth. Detachment isn't cold, it's healing. It's the empath saying, I can love deeply without losing myself. It's not revenge, it's restoration. The avoidant is left to face what they've always run from, themselves. The silence forces reflection. The emptiness reveals truth. And the absence of the empath becomes the most profound presence they'll ever feel. So if you're that empath, know this. Your heart is your superpower, but your boundaries are your armor. When you finally detach, you don't destroy someone's world, you just stop holding it up. Detachment, for a super empath, is not an impulsive reaction. It's the final stage of understanding. It comes after countless attempts to communicate, to connect, to fix, and to forgive. For a long time, the empath believes that if they can just love harder, explain better, or stay longer, they can reach the avoidant's heart. But over time, the reality settles in. Their emotional investment isn't being met with reciprocity, only with resistance. The empath begins to see that their willingness to absorb pain in the name of love is no longer noble, it's self-neglect. And when they finally choose detachment, it isn't out of spite, but out of the deepest form of self-respect. In that moment, the empath's focus shifts from external validation to internal peace. They stop waiting for the avoidant to show up, to open up, or to change. They realize that the power they've been giving away, to apologies never spoken, to explanations never offered, belongs to them. This realization is quiet but profound. It feels like exhaling after holding one's breath for too long. For the first time, they understand that love should not require the constant sacrifice of one's emotional safety. It's not that they stop loving the avoidant, they just stop betraying themselves in the process. Self-respect in this context becomes the line that separates compassion from self-abandonment. The empath has often confused endurance with devotion. They have mistaken their tolerance for strength. But real strength lies in knowing when to stop pouring into someone who refuses to hold the cup. It lies in recognizing that saving someone from their emotional avoidance is not an act of love. It's a form of self-erasure. The empath begins to see their value beyond the relationship, beyond the role of healer or nurturer. They see themselves as whole, not because of who they love, but because of who they've become through loving. This newfound self-respect doesn't demand closure. It doesn't need an apology or explanation. It simply stands on its own. The empath stops justifying their needs and starts honoring them. They learn to walk away, not to prove a point, but to preserve their peace. What once felt like loss now feels like liberation. Detachment becomes an act of quiet rebellion against the emotional chaos that once defined their connection. It's the moment when they stop fighting to be understood and start choosing to be at ease. The beauty of this transformation lies in its subtlety. There is no dramatic exit, no loud declaration, just a calm withdrawal of energy. The avoidant may not even notice it at first, but eventually they feel the absence because the empath's emotional presence had always been the glue holding everything together. The empath's self-respect dismantles the dynamic that kept them small. It reclaims the balance that was lost the moment they started prioritizing someone else's comfort over their own well-being. In the end, detachment rooted in self-respect is not a closing of the heart, but a redirection of it. The empath still loves deeply, but now they love themselves enough to walk away from what diminishes that depth. They finally understand that. True love cannot thrive where self-respect is missing. And once they've tasted that clarity, there's no going back. The avoidance world is built on the illusion of control. They create emotional distance to feel safe, to protect themselves from vulnerability, and to maintain the upper hand in relationships. When they meet a super empath, it feels comfortable at first. The empath's warmth, patience, and understanding provide a sense of stability that allows the avoidant to relax. The empath becomes the anchor, always available, always forgiving, always trying to bridge the emotional gap. For the avoidant, this consistency is comforting. Even if they never admit it, it reassures them that no matter how far they pull away, someone will always be waiting when they decide to return. But this dynamic is fragile because it depends entirely on the empath's willingness to keep giving without receiving. Over time, the avoidant begins to take that emotional safety for granted. The empath's love becomes a background melody, always there, always reliable, even when ignored. The avoidant convinces themselves that this connection is unshakable, that the empath will never leave because their empathy seems limitless. They misinterpret compassion as dependency and patience as weakness. This false sense of security allows the avoidant to continue avoiding. They never have to face the discomfort of emotional intimacy because the empath keeps doing the work for both of them. The avoidant doesn't realize that this dynamic is not sustainable. It's built on borrowed energy. But when the empath finally detaches, the illusion shatters. The avoidant, who has spent so much time trying to stay in control, suddenly finds themselves powerless. The emotional equilibrium they relied on collapses. The messages stop. The warmth disappears. The emotional cushion that once protected them from their own fears is gone. What they mistook for a constant is revealed to have always been a choice. One the empath no longer makes. This loss confuses and destabilizes the avoidant because it challenges their belief that they were the one who dictated the rhythm of the relationship. The empath's absence forces them to confront the emotional emptiness they've been running from. In this moment, the avoidant feels the true cost of their distance. The silence that once felt like safety now feels like isolation. They begin to sense the depth of what they've lost. Not just a person, but the rare energy of someone who genuinely cared, someone who made space for their guarded heart. The empath's detachment exposes the void that avoidance creates. Without the empath's emotional labor, the avoidant has no buffer between themselves and their own unresolved fears. They are left face to face with the consequences of their own emotional self-sabotage. This is often when the avoidant starts to realize that their control was never control at all. It is dependency disguised as detachment. They depended on the empath's emotional resilience to maintain balance while they remained withdrawn. The empath was the emotional heartbeat of the connection, keeping it alive even when the avoidant pulled away. Once that heartbeat fades, the avoidance world begins to unravel. It's not punishment, it's the natural outcome of imbalance. When the one who gives stops giving, the one who takes is left to face the silence they created. The avoidant finally feels what the empath felt all along: disconnection, loneliness, and the ache of something beautiful that could have been saved if only they dared to open up. Silence carries a power that words often fail to hold. For the super empath, silence is not a weapon. It is a boundary. It comes after every attempt to explain, every heartfelt conversation that went unheard, and every emotional effort that was met with avoidance. When they finally fall silent, it isn't because they have nothing left to say. It's because they've realized that words cannot reach someone who isn't willing to listen. Silence becomes the only language left that can convey the truth of their exhaustion, their clarity, and their decision to stop participating in a one-sided emotional exchange. It's a silence filled with strength, not bitterness. For the avoidant, this silence is unsettling. They have grown accustomed to the empath's constant communication, the emotional reassurance that no matter how much they pull away, someone will always be there to bridge the distance. When that bridge suddenly collapses, the avoidant is left standing alone on their island of emotional detachment. At first, they might mistake the silence for another phase, a temporary withdrawal, a momentary shift. But as time passes and the empath does not return, the weight of that silence begins to settle. It's no longer quiet, it's echoing. It holds the sound of absence, of care that once filled the spaces between their walls. The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting everything the avoidant tried not to see. It shows them the coldness of their own behavior, the pattern of their push and pull, and the emptiness that comes from emotional withdrawal. What once felt like safety now feels like isolation. For the first time, the avoidant begins to feel what the empath felt all along: the uncertainty, the confusion, and the pain of being emotionally unseen. The empath's silence forces the avoidant to confront the emotional consequences of their avoidance. It dismantles the illusion that they were the ones in control, revealing that the true power always rested in the empath's willingness to stay engaged. For the empath, this silence is healing. It's a sacred pause, a space where they can hear themselves again. After spending so much time trying to decode mixed signals, they rediscover the peace that comes from not needing to explain or fix anything. Their silence is not coldness, it's clarity. It is the quiet after the storm, where they can finally breathe without the weight of someone else's emotional turbulence pressing against their chest. In that silence, they begin to rebuild themselves, not as someone desperate to be understood, but as someone who no longer needs external validation to feel whole. The silence also teaches the empath one of life's most profound lessons. Not every connection deserves constant effort. Sometimes silence speaks the truth that words could never capture. It says, "I have tried enough." It says, "I will no longer chase peace through chaos." It is a gentle yet powerful declaration of self-worth. And while the avoidant struggles with the absence, trying to fill it with distractions or denial, the empath uses it to reconnect with their strength. Silence becomes their teacher, their healer, and their liberation. It transforms from a sign of defeat into a mark of growth, a symbol that love without balance cannot sustain itself. In the end, that silence speaks volumes, louder and clearer than any words ever could. Emotional strength is often misunderstood. People think it's about enduring pain, staying loyal no matter the cost, or holding everything together when it's falling apart. But for the super empath, emotional strength takes on a different meaning. Once they reach the point of detachment, for so long they have equated strength with staying, forgiving, and continuously understanding someone who cannot meet them halfway. They've prided themselves on being patient, compassionate, and resilient, yet beneath that resilience, exhaustion quietly grows. True strength doesn't come from tolerating what drains you. It comes from having the courage to walk away from what no longer nurtures your spirit. The empath's transformation begins when they recognize that their love has turned into labor. Every reassurance, every act of understanding, and every second chance has become an attempt to keep a connection alive that the avoidant keeps pushing away. The empath realizes that love cannot be sustained by one person's emotional effort. The strongest thing they can do is to stop trying to fix what was never theirs to fix. This realization doesn't arrive with anger. It comes with deep acceptance. They finally see that love does not require them to lose themselves. Instead of bending further, they start to stand taller. The same heart that once ached for connection now beats with a quiet conviction: I deserve balance. As the empath begins to embody this strength, everything changes. The tears that once fell in frustration are replaced by calm understanding. The overthinking stops because they no longer look for answers in the other person's silence. They learn that peace doesn't come from getting closure. It comes from creating it. Walking away isn't a failure. It's an act of self-trust. It's choosing authenticity over attachment. It's looking at someone you love and saying, "I cannot continue to love you at the expense of myself." That kind of courage doesn't come easily. It's earned through pain, through self-reflection, and through finally realizing that being strong doesn't mean holding on. It means knowing when enough is enough. For the avoidant, this newfound strength is disorienting. They were used to an empath who would chase, explain, and forgive endlessly. Seeing that same person now grounded, calm, and emotionally untouchable shakes their perception of control. What once appeared as emotional dependence is revealed to be emotional power. The The empath's calm detachment speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It says, you no longer have access to me in the way you used to. And that realization unsettles the avoidant because the empath's strength exposes the weakness in their avoidance. The empath's emotional strength doesn't come from hardening their heart. It comes from softening toward themselves. They learn to give the same compassion inward that they once poured outward. They stop seeing love as something to earn and start viewing it as something to share freely, but only with those capable of receiving it. Strength for them is no longer about endurance. It's about alignment. It's about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over longing. They no longer need to prove their love. They simply live it, starting with themselves, and in doing so, they redefine what it means to be truly strong, not by how much they can bear, but by how bravely they let go. When the super empath finally detaches, what unfolds is not destruction, it's awakening. The end of the connection may look like loss on the surface, but beneath that loss lies profound transformation. For the empath, detachment is the moment they step out of emotional survival mode and into self-awareness. For the avoidant, it is the moment when their patterns are exposed and they are left face to face with the emptiness they've been trying to outrun. Both experience a reckoning, but it manifests differently. The empath awakens to their power. The avoidant awakens to their absence. For the empath, the awakening begins in the quiet aftermath of letting go. At first, there's a void, an unfamiliar stillness where the noise of emotional chaos used to be. It can feel uncomfortable because they've been conditioned to believe love is proven through effort and sacrifice. But as time passes, that void begins to feel like peace. The empath starts to realize that what they called love was often overextension, an attempt to fill the emotional gaps left by the avoidant. Now, with their energy reclaimed, they begin to pour that same depth of care into themselves. They rediscover joy in solitude, confidence in boundaries, and calm in clarity. The awakening reveals that love doesn't have to hurt to be real. It can be kind, balanced, and reciprocal. For the avoidant, the awakening is slower and often painful. When the empath leaves, the avoidant loses the emotional mirror that once reflected their hidden needs. The absence of that connection exposes the loneliness they've spent their life denying. The silence, which once provided relief, now feels suffocating. They may try to distract themselves, convincing their mind they are fine, but their heart begins to whisper otherwise. They feel the weight of all the words they never said, all the closeness they resisted, and all the moments they dismissed. This is the beginning of their awakening, the realization that avoidance doesn't protect them. It isolates them. For the first time, they understand that emotional distance may keep them safe from pain, but it also keeps them away from love. This phase of awakening is raw and transformative for both. The empath learns to channel their sensitivity into strength. They stop defining themselves through their ability to heal others and start embracing the beauty of being whole on their own. The avoidant, if they choose to face their pain, has an opportunity to grow as well, to confront their fears of intimacy and vulnerability, and to see that connection is not a threat, but a gift. The ending becomes a catalyst for emotional evolution. What once seemed like a tragedy becomes a turning point. The empath's detachment doesn't destroy the connection. It transforms it into a lesson, a mirror, a moment of truth. The avoidant learns the cost of emotional resistance, and the empath learns the value of emotional boundaries. The relationship, though it may not survive, serves its purpose by awakening both to who they truly are. One learns that love must be mutual to be meaningful. The other learns that running from love only leads back to loneliness. In that awakening, both find a new beginning, not together, but within themselves. In the end, when a super empath finally detaches, it is not the death of love, but the birth of self-awareness. It marks the moment when peace replaces chaos and clarity silences confusion. The avoidant is left to face the emptiness their distance created, while the empath rises in quiet strength, no longer driven by pain, but guided by purpose. Their separation becomes a mirror, a teacher, and ultimately a transformation for both. Thank you all for listening, for reflecting, and for recognizing that true connection begins when we learn to honor ourselves first.